This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are back in the studio this week. Last week we did our show from Sunnyvale, California, out in Silicon Valley. And a number of you participated through your comments on Facebook Live, but also through your questions via email. This episode, we're going to discuss the challenges, particularly of innovators around talent. It's a challenge for a lot of people these days. If you're not technical, how do you go find that right technical talent? But also, how do you go through the whole process, given that there's just so many choices out there from the standpoint of posting your job or posting your idea and asking people to bid on helping build a prototype, those kinds of things. So this week we're going to talk about talent and the whole challenge of finding talent. How do you reduce the risk of talent? What are the different approaches to that? And how that is actually a key to your success in taking whatever idea that is, rattling around in your brain, and actually be able to turn that in to make it something real. So, and this week we have Brendan. Now, Brendan, I always have a problem with pronouncing your last name. How do you pronounce it again?
It's Benishot.
Benishot. Brendan is one of the co-founders at a company called TopTal. I've gotten introduced to TopTal, probably about a month and a half or 2 months ago. You probably don't even know, but I actually reached out and talked to some of your clients to find out their experience with it, and kind of get why you are different. But before we get into the whole TopTal discussion, why don't you just take a few minutes, introduce yourself to the guest, give us a little bit of background on your history, your background, and et cetera, and then we'll pick up from there. But I want to give you a few minutes just to kind of get a chance to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. So my name is Brendan Benishot, and I'm currently the co-founder and COO of TopTal, as you just said, Phil. My background, I have a degree in chemical engineering from Princeton, and definitely consider myself an engineer. And my background was Princeton's a very expensive school. I had to pay for it myself. And so the way that I did that was by being a freelance software engineer on the side. And so by the time I graduated, it was pretty clear it was a good time to be a software engineer. And we started TopTal actually several months before that. And so most of my professional career has actually been at TopTal, with the exception of all the freelancing before that.
So let's back up a little bit. You went to school to be a chemical engineer, and then you became a software engineer.
Well, I'm not sure I ever wanted to be a chemical engineer. I heard it was the hardest, and it was one of those things of like, if I can do this, I can prove to myself I can do anything.
So you actually took it on as the challenge, right? Lay down the gauntlet. You're going to do the hard thing. And actually, that's not that uncommon, right? Because look, in my case, my original major was architecture. It wasn't software engineering. But then I figured out how hard, the challenges of being an architect. I had this vision of being the next Frank Lloyd Wright. And then the reality is you spent the first 10 years designing bathrooms in new high-rises. not what I wanted to do as an architect. And I switched to computer graphics. And in fact, I have staff now. I've got a guy who's a PhD geologist who actually heads up my advanced technology group. So it's amazing, right? And it does point to the fact that just because you get a degree in something doesn't mean what it is you really are passionate about or what you want to do. So question then is so you were doing freelance. So were you using all of the different freelancing, platforms out there? Were you on one that you preferred at the time? Or I'm assuming your experience with those platforms is what kind of bit the bug on, this isn't right, there's got to be a better way.
Definitely. So I had very brief stints on the existing platforms at the time, so Odesk, Elance, et cetera, and really found that it was kind of a race to the bottom, and I was competing against people all over the world saying they could do the same thing for $1 an hour, and it just wasn't viable. I mean, I had to make tuition. And so I think I got lucky in the beginning and got a good client, did a really good job, and then word of mouth took over from there. And so that's the only thing that I ever used was word of mouth.
Yeah. So in this case, then you said you started TopTal while you were still at Princeton, or was it after you graduated? What was the timing between finishing up your degree and then you and your co-founder starting TopTal?
It was about 6 months before I finished Princeton. So TopTal's more or less started from my dorm room.
So were all your co-founders then with you at Princeton? Is that the commonality between your co-founders?
No, we were actually neighbors in Palo Alto. So I kept going back to Palo Alto where I really felt at home during the summers and stuff. And I was incubating some companies and working as a freelance software developer during the summers, et cetera. Tasso Duval, my co-founder now, was my neighbor back then. And he was also a software engineer at Slide and a bunch of big companies in the Valley. And that's how we met. He was not a student at the time. He just happened to, I was trying to scale a team that I was on, an engineering team, and having a really hard time doing it because it's just very hard finding really, really top level engineers. And so you always try to go to your personal network and everybody's always taken. And so one day I'm sitting in a University Cafe or something in downtown Palo Alto, and Tasso comes in, and I'm pretty frustrated at that point because the last 20 interviews that I did, people were just not what I was looking for. And I just asked him if he knows anybody who's available. And he says, yeah, I do. But he's in Argentina. And I'm like, I don't care. I trust you. And if you think he's amazing, I'm willing to give it a shot. And so I think in a way I was kind of the first TopTal client via this sort of model that we kind of been thinking about both independently for a long time, but almost on the fly, it just came to fruition. And then he came and visited me a couple months later in Princeton, and it was going unbelievably well with Ignacio. And just extremely smart individual. And he was in Argentina. I was in Princeton. We were just killing it every single day. And I was like, Tasso, dude, how did you find Ignacio? And he kind of had ideas about how to find more Ignacios. And at that point, having talked to Ignacio and been kind of opening up my horizon to the world instead of just the US and San Francisco or New York, et cetera, realized that there are more people like Ignacio, and if we could bring them together, this could be a world-changing company.
So back up a little bit, because you said you were in the middle of trying to find good staff for the effort. What were some of the challenges in finding those people? Either were they taken, or were you looking for something maybe is a little bit different than just the traditional? Can you do HTML5 and Ruby on Rails and et cetera?
Everybody, for the most part, was taken, who I considered to be extremely good. So to me, an engineer is just a extremely proactive and tremendous problem solver. And then they usually have some experience with software, et cetera. And so just kind of, that's a simple definition. But as soon as I would start interviewing people, it was very clear that they weren't really great developers, and basic sort of problem solving skills really weren't there. And so I could ping all my friends who were already at companies and ask them for their friends, and they're already at Facebooks and Googles, et cetera, of course, with massive salaries that I can't afford at the time. And so I tried posting jobs on Monster and LinkedIn and Upwork, or I guess at the time it was Odesk, and it sort of worked. I mean, I got probably 1,000 resumes. 80% of those you can toss out immediately, but then what are you going to do? Interview 200 people? It takes months.
Yeah.
And the process was just brutal, and the hit rate was just really poor. And
I've tried a couple of projects on Odesk and have not had much time in the with regards to being able to find the right people. Again, you get flooded, then you try to weed them down and try to get to the right person. Of all the projects I've done, I've just never had ones where I just kind of knocked it out of the park from that perspective. So when you were trying to hire that originally, was it for TopTal, or were you thinking about a different company at the time?
I was working on a different company at the time.
So you were trying to scale up an engineering team, and then through that experience, saying there's got to be a better way to find better engineers to help other organizations scale as part of that process.
Exactly. And the whole thing was you need a core team member to be on your team, not just a team that you can throw a project to. You need somebody who's a clone of you.
Right.
And when Ignacio proved that you could do that remotely to me, and Tasso proved it as well. And so that's kind of the starting of TopTal.
Yeah. So that's an interesting problem, right? Because actually I've kind of shifted for instance, for the work on the on this for the radio show and that, I now have full-time staff. I hire them. But again, it's interviewing and finding someone that actually you don't even have to complete the sentence. They know exactly what the next step is, and they know exactly what it is they have to go off and do. We're going to need to take this quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick up right where we left off and continue the conversation with Brendan around the experience of starting TopTal, growing it, and the success they've had. So stay right there where you're at. We're going to be right back after this commercial break. You're listening to the Killer Innovations radio show on the BizTalk Radio Network.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome to this week's episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. This episode, we're going to continue on our conversation from the first segment with Brendan Beneschot, who's one of the co-founders at TopTal. TopTal is, well, we're going to get into a little bit more of a discussion. We talked a little bit about Brendan's background in the first segment. This time, we're going to talk a little bit more about TopTal and actually how it started. So, Brendan, you were talking in the last segment about the fact that you started this about 6 months before you actually graduated from Princeton. And the catalyst of this, it sounds like, was your own frustration of trying to scale up engineering teams, but then having one really phenomenal, great experience at finding remote resources. And then I'm guessing the question is asking yourself, could you replicate that across, a large pool? So take us back. What was kind of that 6 months while you were still in the dorm, that catalyst in the process of launching TopTal?
Sure. So at that point, as a developer myself, I was getting pinged all the time. Like, oh, Brendan, are you available? Are you available? And I wasn't. I had class or I would be on another project most of the time. So I was able to kind of quickly say, I'm not available, but you got to try this thing that we're working on. And so the first initial batch of TopTal clients was like my network, and they came to us, and then that worked really well. Then they told their friends, and so we quickly got decent size from my dorm room. And so by the time we graduated, I think we were at 1 million run rate, more or less. On the, I'm like skipping class and stuff. And
I can only imagine once you start the monster, you got to feed the monster, which is always the problem, right?
Yeah. And then on the talent side of TopTal, Tasso and I spent a lot of time figuring out, well, Ignacio is amazing. Like, you're a good engineer. I'm a good engineer. We know a bunch of good engineers, and we've interviewed at places like Facebook and et cetera. We know how they interview. And so what is it about Ignacio and like us working remotely that actually works? And so we come up with this kind of intense profile of what a remote software engineer needs to kind of look like, their experience, their interest, personality, everything. And then we work backwards and come up with the screening process that we think is going to guarantee that somebody is that or better. And then by talking to Ignacio and actually traveling a bunch of different places and interviewing thousands and thousands of people over that next 6 months, we get a small trickle of TopTalers into the TopTal network. And they're working with some of our friends who are at these hot startups in San Francisco and New York, because those are like our former classmates in our network, and they're bringing in their friends. And so very, very quickly, the network effect of TopTal took off, because it was an awesome way to work with really great teams in Silicon Valley or New York, regardless of where you were. So you had people that were kind of either in places like Argentina, or you had lots of people that were in San Francisco and they wanted a San Francisco salary, but they wanted to travel and be kind of like a digital nomad, or live someplace where they could leverage that salary. And it was 10x, their dollars went 10 times as far, et cetera. And so I think everything took off very organically, and it was just nonstop hustle and interviewing thousands and thousands of people in the early days.
So in the case of the interviews, right, we were talking a little bit during the commercial break on, the whole process of, you gotta go talk to a lot of people. What is kind of the number of people who apply to TopTal versus how many people actually make it in to the TopTal network? How many, as I say, how many frogs do you have to kiss?
The number that's on our site is 3%. That's actually gone down quite a bit. So I know last quarter it was about 1.4.
Wow.
So that's the hit rate, and we see hundreds of thousands of applications.
And is that just because everybody thinks they're good, or if you had to categorize maybe the 99 that don't make it, what do you could you categorize maybe like the top 3 things that are missing that would make them a really top engineer?
Sure. So English and personality is a huge issue, and so if you're super shy or like can't speak up, or you're like unpleasant or aggressive or can't speak English, I mean that's a huge amount right off the top. Then the next thing is basic problem solving ability, and so with a simple sort of logic problem or like algorithm test or anything like that knocks off a lot as well. And it's not really the sort of thing that you need to come fresh out of like a computer science or computer engineering background in order to solve. It's like if you think hard, you can solve this problem, and a lot of people struggle a lot with that. And to us, that's an important skill to have. The next one is probably integrity, and we take that very seriously. So people do cheat on our stuff all the time, and we take that even more seriously. But showing up on time to an interview, and every single time, and when we do test projects with everybody, like nailing the exact deadline of when you say you're going to have something, and if you show up like empty-handed or you're late or anything like that, we take that really seriously, because in my experience, because I had actually lost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to outsource in South Asia before, and learned a lot of tough lessons that way. And to me, any sort of issue like this integrity stuff we're talking about is just the start of a pattern, and it's not worth gambling, because we can't be in a position where we're gambling with the client's engagement.
Right, exactly. The integrity one is interesting because it is about the initiative to execute and follow through and to communicate, right?
Yes.
The ones I've seen with a lot of offshore engineering resources is you kind of drop something in, and it kind of becomes, drops into a black hole. And then, you're not getting any form of back and forth to kind of let get you the comfort feel that everything's coming together. And then all of a sudden you get that surprise at the end. And
for us to work remotely effectively, it needs to feel like you're sitting in the same room.
Right.
It needs to feel, as you said, you're kind of completing each other's sentences, and you're talking nonstop, and it's not, looking over and speaking to them. It's through a computer, but you're kind of always available and always collaborating. And if that basic communication isn't there, then it's just too difficult.
Yeah, and it does point out that that challenge on the personality styles of different regions of the world. I don't know if you've had this.
Absolutely.
At HP, I had engineers all over the world, and you could pick out, you could have some basic interaction even on email, and you could nail, from where they're from based on based on their communication style.
And all those details are extremely important to our process, and I think in just working remotely or with any engineering team in general. And so that's a big part of what we look at.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we're gonna take another quick commercial break here. When we come back, let's pick up and talk about specifically the kinds of projects and the kinds of talent, because you've got a fairly large pool of technical resources. I'm interested in kind of digging in a little bit to kind of talk a little bit about, kind of the ideal projects, kind of those experiences, and then how do people engage if they've got, what's the ideal project that you think works really, really well for TopTal resources. So stay right there. We're going to be right back. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network, and we're just going to take this quick commercial break. So stay right there.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovators Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We're going to pick up our conversation. We've been talking with Brendan Beneschot, who's one of the co-founders at TopTal, a firm that's looking to really crack the code of not just supporting outsourcing, but really having that absolutely top talent pool where you have that confidence factor that when you start that project, you're actually going to get the top resources. You know, it's always the A team. You never have to worry about being stuffed with the B, C's, or D teams on your project. So Brendan, we were talking before the break about how you find those resources and the fact that you're down in the 1% range of the people who apply who actually make it into the TopTal network of resources. But the flip side also probably applies, right? There's some clients and some people who are your clients who maybe are set up and really understand how to take advantage of this. And there's probably some clients who think they're ready for it, but they're really not ready for it. Am I on the mark here, or am I off base?
I mean, you're absolutely on the mark. There's definitely we have to do a screening process for clients as well, just to make sure that the people who are coming here engaging TopTal engineers are going to thrive. And that's not everybody. So
is there certain things, if you were, because keep in mind the listeners for the show typically are either they're innovation or the guys who are the change agents trying to develop new kinds of ideas inside of large organizations. And there are also a lot of founders, CEOs who are also listeners of the podcast. So if you were to advise them on what they needed to have in place to really be able to take advantage of something like TopTal, what would that be? What would be your advice to those companies?
So on the startup side, if we kind of a joke here, it came from when I was freelancing too, where people would ping me and they were kind of they want me to build them Facebook for $3,000. And that's usually a red flag.
Yeah. So there's the sniff test. That doesn't pass the sniff test.
Yeah. So people here usually have experience with software development. Either they've been at a tech company in the past, they are engineers themselves, or they come from that just background. And so there's experience is really important. And our clients value quality and speed over cost or anything else. And so, I mean, good software takes a long time to build. It is expensive. You need really smart people to do it. And I mean, that's what we offer. And so if you come in like thinking that overnight, Facebook for $3,000 is the perfect example, because I mean, we turn down people like that every single day. On the enterprise side, we do a lot of business with some of the biggest companies in the world. And we're kind of competing, I think, with a lot of maybe the Accentures and the Wipros, the TCSs, et cetera. And it's really, as you said, all about that A team. So if you come to the TopTal, we sit down with you and we figure out exactly what you're trying to do with the team of engineers on the core team here. And then we are hand matching people to you that you can interview however you see fit. And then they're working with you as if they were working directly on your core team. So through that white glove service for enterprises, people are able to put together a world-class team and keep that world-class team. I think a very common thing that happens when you engage some of the largest outsourcing firms in the world is that you start with the A team and slowly it gets replaced by the B and C and D team because the A team's off winning another client. And
right, exactly.
You don't have the C or D team, and so your team's here to stay. And a lot of companies are taking advantage of that, and that's the biggest way that we're growing is with enterprise clients who are seeing that.
So is there a matching process then, where you've got a client who's got all the right characteristics? They've got that sense of realism of the type of activity or the project that they're going after, and then is there a matching process then to really get the people with the right is it a personality match? How do you match the right team to the right client?
So we will sit down with the client. There's a team of engineers here. And so directors of engineering will sit down with you as a client, trying to understand exactly what it is you're trying to do and who you're looking for. And we come out of these conversations with a profile of what your perfect candidate or your team of people look like. And then we turn around and work together to identify the best matches within TopTal, people that we know really well. They went through this 40-day on average screening process with us, and then they've been working with clients with us. And what that means is we turn around and usually introduce you to one or two people per position, and then clients interview one or two people and hire one or two people instead of interviewing 500 people.
Right. So in this case, for TopTal, like if you deal with Odesk or whatever, it's typically, and in some cases, some of the resourcing is they do the interviewing, but then the client takes them on as an employee. In the case of TopTal, they stay with you though. They don't come on to the client side. So it really is a project orientation. Is that how you think about it?
Sometimes. I mean, it depends on the client. And so we do have what's called like a placement fee. So it's kind of the best of both worlds of the flexibility of freelancing or contracting, but then also headhunting. And so what we say is go as long as you want with maximum flexibility. And then if you want to bring somebody onto your core team, we do like a headhunting fee.
Okay.
Typical so in the Valley.
So you get to do the the term of try before you buy.
Exactly.
Type of thing. And so is there an average size of a project for you? Is your average project 3 people, 30 people, 5 people? Well, what's the scale for a TopTal project?
So we're not necessarily doing that many projects. A lot of people will hire us to augment their existing teams, and so they'll need 1 or 2 iOS specialists or mobile specialists or something like that. DevOps, data science, like everything. The average client that we have hires multiple TopTal engineers, and then as you get into the larger organizations, they're hiring many TopTal engineers. Given that most of our business has historically been SMBs and startups, and then just recently it's really started taking off in the enterprise world, the numbers are rapidly increasing. So the average project size is getting larger and larger, but it's always been in the many tens of thousands.
So with that challenge, given that now you're getting larger enterprise clients, and the number of resources that they need to have, they're looking for. I'm guessing, given that you screen a lot but only accept a few, is that a bottleneck for your growth then? Is that ability to get the right people into TopTal? Because I'm guessing you've got a pretty good set of team out there just constantly trying to find those next people to come into the TopTal network.
You mean on the engineer side? Or
on the engineering side, on the resources that you make available to clients.
Gotcha. Well, the way that I think about it is we work really hard to make sure any engineer in the TopTal network constantly has multiple good opportunities to create value for themselves and TopTal. And so that works, and we pour a lot of resources into that, and a lot of smart people focus on that at all times. And so people have such a good experience once they're in TopTal, and that's very, very good pay, like very high security, and you're surrounded with really, really smart people all over the world, and you have all this flexibility. And so people's friends and entire networks join as a result. And so the organic growth has taken care of itself.
So that's a good point. So if you looked at we talked before about how many people do you interview to how many do you accept. Do you have a higher hit rate then on the referrals coming from your current TopTal network? I'm guessing you would.
Hundreds of %.
Yeah, same with any organization, right? You hire a really good engineer, when they recommend somebody, you go, okay. If they've already screened them, you're already in a whole different category.
Everybody has to go. It doesn't matter if my best friend joins. Everybody has to go through the same screening process at TopTal, because again, we just cannot be gambling with a client.
Exactly. You can't skip, right?
But the math works out. So I mean, they just do significantly better.
Yes, that's great. Hey, Brandon, I know we were going to have you on for the first 3 segments, but do you have a couple extra minutes? Could you come back for the next segment? I want to continue on this conversation, because I think you're onto something here that key for a lot of the early stage, startup companies, particularly around, got that great idea and have a hard time just getting, trying to get a really top engineer to take the risk on an early startup. You guys kind of have that solution for those startup guys out there.
Okay.
So why don't you stay right there? We're going to come back. We've got this short commercial break, and then we'll pick up the conversation, particularly around startup companies in the challenge of finding those early resources to actually help take a a really early nascent idea. We have a lot of listeners who are in that category, and I know they'd be interested in hearing your thoughts and also your experiences having done it, as in your own engineering background. So when we come back, we're going to pick up that conversation. Really quick, if you want to get connected to Killer Innovations, just text the word innovate to 33444. If you're outside the U.S., go to killerinnovations.com/innovate. Stay right there. We'll be right back. You're listening to Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
BizTalkRadio.com.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Welcome back to this episode of Killer Innovations, a show about creativity, innovation, and design. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We're picking up our conversation. We've been talking about talent and the challenges of really getting out there and finding the top best talent for your project or your idea. We're sitting here with Brendan Benishat, who's the co-founder for TopTal, which is a company that actually goes off and finds that top talent, creates this what they call the TopTal network of these top engineers to work on projects and programs for their clients. Now, a number of you that listen to this show, you're in that startup phase. You probably have that raw idea. And, in some cases, some of you have sent me an email asking, hey, I've got this idea, but I'm not technical. How do I get my idea done in such a way that it actually becomes something real when you're non-technical? And actually, I think TopTal could be one of those resources. So Brendan, I want you to share a little bit about your experience, particularly working with people who, those innovators that have got that first raw idea, maybe not even classified, quote, in a traditional startup mode, and what your experience has been in working with some of those, and maybe, share some of those stories.
Sure. So, sometimes you get the people who are asking you to build Facebook for $3,000, and that doesn't go over so well. But we work really well with a lot of early stage startups and some non-technical founders as well. And so some examples, we've been the engineering team or a significant part of the engineering team of a lot of companies that have gone through like Techstars and incubators like that, even through the application process, et cetera, and then have gone on Series A, Series B, and acquisitions. And we've been the engineering team behind companies that you recognize. A lot of times I don't want everybody to know that, but we are in the background at a lot of these companies. And so, some of the advice, I always tell people to come to TopTal. The sales engineers here many of them are coming from a development background themselves. And so we're very consultative and we'll be honest. Like, we're not just going to come try to take your money. We will point you in the right direction if you're not ready to engage an engineer. But a lot of people are, and they're sometimes engaging a TopTal engineer to help even with like high level speccing and planning or UI designs, like concepts, et cetera. And then sometimes people are coming and they're ready to build. They have mock-ups, et cetera. And so they don't have the ability to go interview 500 engineers to try to find the right fit. So they can come to TopTal and engage somebody right away and get it. If maybe it's an MVP or maybe it's an integration or something like that. And that's a big bulk of our business.
Yeah, in fact, I was, checking out your site before the interview today, and looking through kind of, some of the resourcing and capabilities that you have. And one that was catching interest, because I get a lot of these kinds of questions, is around helping someone take kind of an idea and just get it to the point of a wireframe, or get something that you get a mock-up so that they can actually go raise that money in order to do it, which I think is an important part of the whole process, right? Of how do you help somebody get that idea out of here down into something that's real in order to really start. So I think the key here is not to think about TopTal, if I'm correct, not just being the hardcore software engineers, but really everything through the life cycle of a process.
Yeah, and I think if you're in that position, you're super early stage like that. We do an engineering blog that goes through a lot of tutorials, et cetera, about how to kind of get it from your head to paper in terms of concepts, et cetera. And then I always tell people to join Quora and start asking questions there, because you will get really awesome help, and you'll see a lot of people who are openly sharing their sort of war stories and successes, et cetera.
That's actually a good recommendation. It is to go out. Don't think that you got to go find it out by yourself. The people in the community tend to be very open, and even in Killer Innovations, if you're in the innovation space, you can go over. There's the group over on LinkedIn, which is very active. 3,000. And these are senior executive innovators to be able to go ask those kinds of questions. So as you wrap up here, real quick, what's the best way? If someone wants to, follow you individually, but then also find TopTel. If they want to find you and follow what you're doing, are you out there blogging yourself, or is everything really wrapped into TopTel?
I've published articles in lots of different places, and there's not a real pattern yet. Sometimes it's like Tim Ferriss or Huffington Post, or kind of whoever will take it, I guess. The best way to get in contact with me is just to send me an email. It's Brendan, BREANDEN @toptal.com.
And then it's toptal.com if someone is interested in potentially talking with TopTel about becoming part of a project or a program that they've got active in.
Exactly.
Great. Hey, Brendan, thank you very much. I know that it takes a little time out of people's weekends to come onto the show. I greatly appreciate you taking that time. For those of you that have been listening to this, resourcing and finding that right resource to take that idea you have and moving it forward is key. And it's not just about finding even just a technical co-founder, which may be one great approach, but taking advantage of these other resources that are out there that are available to you to get the best talent. It really is about not just settling for somebody or your cousin or a friend of your cousin's who claims to know PHP. It really is about finding that talent that really has that expertise. And if you're not technical, it's very hard to be in that process of selecting and identifying, who's going to be the right. You can waste a lot of time and a lot of money, spinning your wheels and not make the progress if you don't have that A team. So don't settle, get the A team. From wherever you do, just make sure you got that A team. So as we wrap up today's show, appreciate you taking the time out of your Sunday to join us here at Killer Innovations. If you've joined us on Facebook Live, really appreciate you joining the stream, also with Zoom, thanking our technology sponsors here. One thing I would ask is, we do all this content for free. It's part of our pay it forward approach here at Killer Innovations. The only thing I ask from you is to share with others. Let other people know about the show, what we talk about here. And if there's resources here that you think somebody should hear or should listen to, feel free to forward that over to them. And the other thing I would ask is go over to iTunes, just give us a quick rating over at iTunes and leave us a comment. We read each and every one of them. I'm on there all the time checking them. So any feedback you have on how we can make the show deliver the value that you need to take your idea from that kernel and turn it into that breakthrough Killer Innovations. With that, we're going to wrap up this week's show. Appreciate the time again out of your schedule of listening. The podcast comes out Tuesday mornings at 8 a.m. East Coast time, so find us over on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast content. You're listening to Killer Innovations, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
The opinions you hear on Biz Talk Radio are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect those of this station, Biz Talk Radio, its management, or advertisers. The information on Biz Talk Radio does not constitute a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any product or service. If you have any questions about Biz Talk Radio, contact us at 817-274-1609 or at biztalkradio.com. biztalkradio.com.